Mr. Secretary, you are recognized.
Chairman Smith, Ranking Member Rogers, members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today to discuss our recent drawdown and evacuation operations in Afghanistan. I'm pleased to be joined by Generals Milley and McKenzie, who I know will be able to provide you with additional context. I am incredibly proud of the men and women of the U.S. Armed Forces who conducted themselves with tremendous skill and professionalism throughout the war, the drawdown, and the evacuation. Over the course of our nation's longest war, 2,461 of our fellow Americans made the ultimate sacrifice, along with more than 20,000 who still bear the wounds of war, some of which cannot be seen on the outside. Now, we can discuss and debate the decisions, the policies, and the turning points since April of this year, when the President made clear his intent to end American involvement in this war. And we can debate the decisions over the last 20 years that led us to this point. But the one thing not open to debate is the courage and compassion of our service members, who, along with their families, served and sacrificed to ensure that our homeland would never again be attacked the way it was on September 11, 2001. I had the chance to speak with many of them during my trip to the Gulf region a few weeks ago, including the Marines who lost 11 of their teammates at the Abbey Gate in Kabul on the 26th of August. I've never been more humbled and inspired. They are rightfully proud of what they accomplished and the lives they saved in such a short period of time. The reason that our troops were able to get there so quickly is because we planned for just such a contingency. We began thinking about the possibilities for a non-combatant evacuation as far back as this spring. By late April, 2 weeks after the President's decision, military planners had crafted a number of evacuation scenarios. In mid-May, I ordered CENTCOM to make preparations for a potential non-combatant evacuation operation. And 2 weeks later, I began pre-positioning forces in the region to include 3 infantry battalions. On the 10th of August, we ran another tabletop exercise around a non-combatant evacuation scenario. We wanted to be ready, and we were. By the time that the State Department called for the NEO, significant numbers of additional forces had already arrived in Afghanistan, including leading elements of the 24th Marine Expeditionary Unit, who were already on the ground in Kabul. Before that weekend was out, another 3,000 or so ground troops had arrived, including elements of the 82nd Airborne. To be clear, those first 2 days were difficult. We all watched with alarm the images of Afghans rushing the runway in our aircraft. We all remember the scene of confusion.
Sorry, we'll get that under control. Go ahead, sir.
Outside the airport, but within 48 hours, our troops restored order and the process began to take hold. Our soldiers, airmen, and Marines, in partnership with our allies, our partners, and our State Department colleagues, secured the gates, took control of the airport operations, and set up a processing system for the tens of thousands of people that they would be manifesting onto airplanes. They and our commanders exceeded all expectations. We plan to evacuate between 70,000 and 80,000 people. They evacuated more than 124,000 people. We plan to move between 5,000 and 9,000 people per day, and on average, they move slightly more than 7,000 people per day. On military aircraft alone, we flew more than 387 sorties, averaging nearly 23 per day. And at the height of this operation, an aircraft was taking off every 45 minutes. And not a single sortie was missed for maintenance, fuel, or logistical problems. It was the largest airlift conducted in U.S. history, and it was executed in just 17 days. Was it perfect? Of course not. We moved so many people so quickly out of Kabul that we ran into capacity and screening problems at intermediate staging bases outside of Afghanistan. And we're still working to get Americans out who wish to leave. We did not get out all of our Afghan allies enrolled in a special immigrant visa program, and we take that seriously. And that's why we're working across the interagency to continue facilitating their departure. And even with no military presence on the ground, that part of our mission is not over. And tragically, lives were also lost. Several Afghans killed climbing aboard an aircraft on that first day, 13 brave U.S. service members and dozens of Afghan civilians killed in a terrorist attack on the 26th, and we took as many as 10 innocent lives in a drone strike on the 29th. Non-combatant evacuations remain among the most challenging military operations, even in the best of circumstances. And the circumstances in August were anything but ideal. Extreme heat, a landlocked country, no government, a highly dynamic situation on the ground, and an active, credible, and lethal terrorist threat. In the span of just 2 days, from August 13th to August 15th, we went from working alongside a democratically elected, long-term partner government to coordinating warily with a longtime enemy. We operated in a deeply dangerous environment, and it proved a lesson in pragmatism and professionalism. We also learned a lot of other lessons, too, like about how to turn an Air Force base in Qatar to an international airport overnight, and about how to rapidly screen, process, and manifest large numbers of people. Nothing like this has ever been done before, and no other military in the world could have pulled it off. And I think that that's crucial. And I know that members of this committee will have questions on many things, such as why we turned over Bagram Airfield, and how real our over-the-horizon capability is, and why we didn't start evacuation sooner, and why we didn't stay longer to get more people out. So let me take each in turn. Retaining Bagram would have required putting as many as 5,000 U.S. troops in harm's way just to operate and defend it. And it would have contributed little to the mission that we had been assigned, and that was to protect and defend the embassy, which was some 30 miles away. And that distance from Kabul also rendered Bagram of little value in the evacuation. So staying at Bagram, even for counterterrorism purposes, meant staying at war in Afghanistan, something that the President made clear that he would not do. And as for over-the-horizon operations, when we use that term, we refer to assets and target analysis that come from outside the country in which the operation occurs. These are effective and fairly common operations. And just days ago, we conducted one such strike in Syria, eliminating a senior al-Qaeda figure. Over-the-horizon operations are difficult, but absolutely possible. And the intelligence that supports them comes from a variety of sources and not just U.S. boots on the ground. As for when we started evacuations, we offered input to the State Department's decision, mindful of their concerns that moving too soon might actually cause the very collapse of the Afghan government that we all wanted to avoid, and that moving too late would put our people and our operations at greater risk. As I said, the fact that our troops were on the ground so quickly is due in large part to our planning and pre-positioning of forces. As for the mission's end, my judgment remains that extending beyond the end of August would have greatly imperiled our people and our mission. The Taliban made clear that their cooperation would end on the 1st of September. And as you know, we faced grave and growing threats from ISIS-K. So staying longer than we did would have made it even more dangerous for our people and would not have significantly changed the number of evacuees we could get out. So as we consider these tactical issues today, we must also ask ourselves some equally tough questions about the wider war itself and pause to think about the lessons that we've learned over the past 20 years. Did we have the right strategy? Did we have too many strategies? Did we put too much faith in our ability to build effective Afghan institutions, an army, an air force, a police force, and government ministries? We helped build a state, but we could not forge a nation. The fact that the Afghan army that we and our partners trained simply melted away, in many cases without firing a shot, took us all by surprise, and it would be dishonest to claim otherwise. We need to consider some uncomfortable truths. That we did not fully comprehend the depth of corruption and poor leadership in their senior ranks. That we did not grasp the damaging effect of frequent and unexplained rotations by President Ghani of his commanders. that we did not anticipate the snowball effect caused by the deals that the Taliban commanders struck with local leaders in the wake of the Doha Agreement, that the Doha Agreement itself had a demoralizing effect on Afghan soldiers, and that we failed to fully grasp that there was only so much for which and for whom many of the Afghan forces would fight. We provided the Afghan military with equipment and aircraft and the skills to use them. And over the years, they often fought bravely, and tens of thousands of Afghan soldiers and police officers died. But in the end, we couldn't provide them with the will to win, at least not all of them. And as a veteran of that war, I am personally reckoning with all of that. But I hope, as I said at the outset, that we do not allow a debate about how this war ended to cloud our pride in the way that our people fought it. They prevented another 9/11. They showed extraordinary courage and compassion in the war's last days. They made lasting progress in Afghanistan that the Taliban will find difficult to reverse and that the international community should work hard to preserve. And now, our service members and civilians face a new mission, helping these Afghan evacuees move on to new lives and new places. And they are performing that one magnificently as well. And I spent some time with some of them up at Joint Base McGuire-Dix Lakehurst this past Monday. And I know that you share my profound gratitude and respect for their service, their courage, and professionalism, and I appreciate the support that this committee continues to provide them and their families. Thank you.
Chairman Milley.
Chairman Smith, Ranking Member Rogers, thank you for the opportunity to be here with Secretary Austin and General McKenzie to discuss Afghanistan. During the past 20 years, the men and women of the United States military, along with our allies and partners, fought the Taliban, brought Osama bin Laden to justice, denied al-Qaeda sanctuary, and protected our homeland for 2 consecutive decades. Over 800,000 of us in uniform served in Afghanistan. Most importantly, 2,461 U.S. soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines paid the ultimate price. 20,698 were wounded in action, and countless others suffered the invisible wounds of war. There's no doubt in my mind that our efforts prevented an attack on the homeland from Afghanistan, which was our core mission. And everyone who ever served in that war in Afghanistan should be proud. Your service mattered. Beginning in 2011, we steadily drew down our troop numbers, consolidated and closed bases, and retrograded equipment from Afghanistan. At our peak in 2011, we had 97,000 U.S. troops alongside 41,000 NATO troops in Afghanistan. 10 years later, when Ambassador Khalilzad signed the Doha Agreement with Mullah Beretta on 29 February 2020, the United States had 12,600 troops, with 8,000 NATO and 10,500 contractors in Afghanistan. This has been a 10-year multi-administration drawdown, not a 19-month retrograde or a 17-day non-combatant evacuation operation. Under the Doha Agreement, the United States will begin to withdraw its forces contingent upon the Taliban meeting certain conditions, which would lead to a political agreement between the Taliban and the government of Afghanistan. There were 7 conditions applicable to the Taliban and 8 to the United States. While the Taliban did not attack the United States forces, which was one of the conditions, it failed to fully honor any other condition under the Doha Agreement. And perhaps most importantly for the United States national security, the Taliban has never renounced their linkages with al-Qaeda or broke their affiliation with them. We, the United States, adhered to every condition. In the fall of 2020, my analysis then was that an accelerated withdrawal without meeting specific and necessary conditions risks losing the substantial gains made in Afghanistan, would potentially damage U.S. worldwide credibility, and could precipitate a general collapse of the Afghan security forces and the Afghan government, resulting in a complete Taliban takeover or general civil war. That analysis was a year ago. Based on my advice and the advice of the commanders at the time, then Secretary of Defense Esper submitted a memorandum on 9 November recommending that we maintain the U.S. forces, which were then at about 4,500, in Afghanistan until conditions were met for further reductions. 2 days later, on 11 November, I received an unclassified signed order directing the United States military to withdraw all forces from Afghanistan by 15 January 2021. After further discussion regarding the risks associated with such a withdrawal, the order was rescinded. On 17 November, we received a new order to reduce troop levels to 2,500 plus enabling forces no later than 15 January. When President Biden was inaugurated, there were approximately 3,500 U.S. troops, 5,400 NATO, and 6,300 contractors in Afghanistan, tasked to train, advise, and assist a small contingent of counterterrorism forces. And the strategic situation was stalemate. The Biden administration, through the National Security Council process, conducted a rigorous interagency review of the situation in Afghanistan in February, March, and April. During this process, the views of all of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, all of us, the CENTCOM Commander General McKenzie, U.S. 4A Commander General Miller, and myself were all given serious consideration by the administration. We provided a broad range of options in our assessment of their potential outcomes. We couched that in cost, benefit, risk to force, risk to mission. All of that was evaluated against the national security objectives of the United States. On 14 April, the President of the United States, President Biden, announced his decision, and the U.S. military received a change of mission to retrograde all U.S. military forces, maintain a small contingency force of 600 to 700 to protect the embassy in Kabul until the Department of State could coordinate contractor security support, and also to assist Turkey to maintain the Hamid Karzai International Airport and to transition the U.S. mission to over-the-horizon counterterrorism support and security force assistance. It is clear, it is obvious to all of us that the war in Afghanistan did not end on the terms that we wanted, with the Taliban now in power in Kabul. Although the NEO was unprecedented and is the largest air evacuation in history, was a tactical, operational, and logistical success, evacuating 124,000 people, the war was a strategic failure. It came also at an incredible cost in the end, with 11 Marines, 1 soldier, and a Navy corpsman. These 13 gave their lives so that people they never met would have an opportunity to live in freedom. And we must remember that the Taliban was and remains a terrorist organization, and they still have not broken with al-Qaeda. I have no illusions who we are dealing with. It remains to be seen whether or not the Taliban can consolidate power or if the country will further fracture into civil war. But we must continue to protect the United States of America and its people from terrorist attacks from Afghanistan. A reconstituted al-Qaeda or ISIS with aspirations to attack the United States is a very real possibility. And those conditions, to include activity in ungoverned spaces, could present themselves in the next 12 to 36 months. That mission will be much harder now, but not impossible, and we will continue to protect the American people. Strategic decisions have strategic consequences. Over the course of 4 presidents, 12 secretaries of defense, 7 chairmen, 10 CENTCOM commanders, and 20 commanders in Afghanistan, and hundreds of congressional delegation visits and 20 years of congressional oversight, there are many lessons to be learned. Among those lessons is the unprecedented speed of the collapse of the ANSF. However, one lesson we can never forget is that every soldier, sailor, airman, and Marine who served there for 20 years protected our country against attack from terrorists. And for that, we all should be forever grateful, and those soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines should be forever proud. Mr. Chairman, with your permission, I'd like to address a couple of comments about my personal conduct that's been in the media lately.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, you may. Go ahead.
I've served this nation for 42 years. I've spent years in combat and buried a lot of my troops who died while defending this country. My loyalty to this nation, its people, and the Constitution hasn't changed and will never change as long as I have a breath to give. My loyalty to the Constitution and to this nation is absolute, and I will not turn my back on my fallen. With respect to the Chinese calls, I routinely communicated with my counterpart, General Lee, with the knowledge and coordination of civilian oversight. I am specifically directed to communicate with the Chinese by Department of Defense guidance in a document known as the Policy Dialogue System. These military-to-military communications at the highest levels are critical to the security of the United States in order to deconflict military actions, manage crisis, and prevent war between great powers armed with nuclear weapons. The calls on 30 October and 8 January were coordinated before and after with Secretary Esper and Acting Secretary Miller's staffs and the interagency. The specific purpose of the October and January calls was generated by concerning intelligence which caused us to believe the Chinese were worried about an attack by the United States. And last night I briefed that intelligence in detail to the Senate Armed Services Committee, and I'll be happy to brief it to any member or group of members at your discretion in a classified session. And I know, and I am certain, President Trump did not intend on attacking the Chinese, and it is my directed responsibility by the Secretary of Defense to convey that intent. My task at that time was to de-escalate. My message was, again, consistent: calm, steady, de-escalate. We're not going to attack you. At Secretary of Defense Esper's direction, I made a call to General Lee on 30 October. 8 people sat in that call with me, and I read out the call within 30 minutes of the call ending. On 31 December, the Chinese requested a call with me. The Department's Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Asia-Pacific Policy helped coordinate my call, which was then scheduled for 8 January. And he made a preliminary call on 6 January. 11 people attended the call with me, and readouts of this call were distributed to the interagency that same day. On 14 December, then Acting Secretary of Defense Miller had been briefed on the entire program. Shortly after my call ended with General Lee, I informed both Secretary of State Pompeo and White House Chief of Staff Meadows about the call, among several other topics. Soon after that, I attended a meeting with Acting Secretary Miller where I briefed him on the call. Later that same day, on 8 January, Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, called me to inquire about the President's ability to launch nuclear weapons. I sought to assure her that nuclear launch is governed by a very specific and deliberate process. She was concerned and made various personal references characterizing the President. I explained to her that the President is the sole nuclear launch authority, but he doesn't launch them alone, and that I am not qualified to determine the mental health of the President of the United States. There are processes, protocols, and procedures in place, and I repeatedly assured her there is no chance of an illegal, unauthorized, or accidental launch of nuclear weapons. The Presidential Directive and SecDef directives, the Chairman is part of this process to ensure that the President is fully informed when determining the use of the world's deadliest weapons. By law, I am not in the chain of command, and I know that. However, by Presidential Directive and Department of Defense instruction, signed by the President and Secretaries of Defense, I am in the chain of communication to fulfill my legal statutory role as the President's primary military advisor. After the Speaker Pelosi call, I convened a short meeting in my office with key members of my staff to refresh all of us on these procedures, which we practice 3 times a day at the action officer level. Additionally, I immediately informed Acting Secretary of Defense Miller of her call. At no time was I attempting to change or influence the process, usurp authority, or insert myself into the chain of command. But I am expected to give my advice and ensure the President is fully informed on military affairs. I am submitting for the record, and I believe you have it, a couple of memorandums for record, in addition to detailed timelines, and I am happy to discuss in further detail in either classified or unclassified sessions with any or all of you about my actions surrounding these events. I welcome a thorough walkthrough. I'll be happy to provide whatever documents, phone logs, emails, memoranda, witnesses, or anything else you want that will help you understand these events. My oath is to support the Constitution of the United States of America against all enemies, foreign and domestic, and I will never turn my back on that oath. I firmly believe in civilian control of the military as a bedrock principle and essential to the health of this republic, and I'm committed to ensuring the military stays clear of domestic politics. Thank you, Chairman, for the extra time, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. Excuse me. General McKenzie.
Chairman Smith, Ranking Member Rogers, distinguished members of the committee, thanks for the opportunity to testify about recent events in Afghanistan. As a theater commander, I will confine my opening remarks to those matters that were under my direct operational control, specifically the withdrawal of U.S. forces and the subsequent non-combatant evacuation operation. These were two distinct combat missions, both conducted in contact with the enemy. We had a plan for each of them. We executed those plans. And thanks to the valor and dedication of thousands of men and women in harm's way, we completed both missions, fulfilling the President's order to withdraw all U.S. forces and evacuating over 124,000 non-combatants from Afghanistan. I last appeared before this body only days after President Biden announced his decision to withdraw all U.S. forces from that country, and my testimony regarding that decision is already a matter of public record. I'll only reiterate that I had an opportunity to offer my professional advice to the President through the Secretary, and I am confident that he weighed it carefully. That's all any commander can ask. Once the President made his decision, my headquarters and that of U.S. Forces Afghanistan under General Scott Miller made the withdrawal of our forces our top priority. We did this in close coordination with our allies and partners. Every departure of every element was carefully synchronized across the coalition and with our Afghan partners. On no occasion were they caught unaware by our movements. Every base was handed off to Afghan forces according to a mutually understood plan. This is particularly true of Bagram Airfield. Many of you have visited Bagram at some point over the past 20 years and were probably struck by two of its defining features, its sprawling size and its isolation. Virtues for most of its lifespan, they rendered it untenable under the circumstances. The guidance I received in April was to conduct the complete withdrawal of U.S. combat forces and plan for a diplomatic security force of absolutely no more than 650 service members. It was not feasible to preserve the U.S. Embassy in Kabul, hold and defend Hamid Karzai International Airport, the embassy's key link to the outside world, and also defend Bagram Airfield with 650 soldiers and Marines. This is important. The Bagram option went away when we were ordered to reduce our presence to the 650 personnel in Kabul. I'd like to shift briefly to the NEO, which, as I have noted, was a completely different operation than the withdrawal. They were separate. The withdrawal began in April following the President's direction. The decision to conduct a NEO rested with the Department of State, and they made that decision on 14 August. In our NEO planning, Central Command assumed that we would have to bring out a very large number of people. We did not regard the size of a potential NEO as overwhelming or too much to accomplish. We did not regard a Taliban takeover as inevitable, but neither did we rule it out. And we identified critical indicators of an impending collapse of the Afghan National Defense Forces. We crafted branches to our base plan to account for a complete collapse of the Afghan security forces. The Secretary took action in May to make forces available to me for planning. On July the 9th, I requested that our base NEO force, the core package that would go in, be put on 96-hour prepare-to-deploy orders. By August 11th, it was evident to me that Kabul was at risk, and I requested the deployment of a brigade of the 82nd Airborne Division and other elements of our own alert pre-planned force package. And I requested that they be deployed into HKIA, Hamid Karzai International Airfield. These forces flowed swiftly into theater, even as the Afghan National Defense Forces disintegrated, allowing thousands of civilians access to the airfield. Working with Afghan partners composed of elite commando units who did not fall apart, and our arriving NEO forces, on August the 16th, we cleared the airfield and resumed flight operations in a matter of hours. With security reestablished by a force ultimately comprising 5,784 U.S. troops, 8 maneuver battalions, and hundreds of coalition forces, operations continued without interruption until our final flights. By that time, we evacuated over 124,000 people from Afghanistan. This was a difficult mission, made possible by the exceptional professionalism and valor of the joint force on the ground in Afghanistan and across the entire world. I would specifically like to use this opportunity to thank the C-17 crews of the Air Mobility Command for a feat rivaling and exceeding, in fact, the Berlin airlift. Moments after the last of the final 5 C-17s lifted off from HKIA, I held a briefing with the Pentagon Press Corps and expressed my gratitude and admiration for the forces who carried out this NEO. I also provided various figures that conveyed the magnitude of their accomplishment. I won't reiterate those figures here and now, but I will say that after the passage of nearly a month, my pride in their accomplishment remains undiminished. I don't need to tell this body that on 26 August, 11 Marines, 1 sailor, and 1 soldier made the ultimate sacrifice on behalf of their country. We will never forget them. This was a combat operation of the most difficult sort, a non-combatant evacuation carried out in contact with the enemy. The enemy in this case was ISIS Khorasan, a vile, tenacious foe that would undoubtedly have killed many, many more Americans and innocent Afghans at H-Kaya if it were not for the vigilance of our forces there. On 29 August, we undertook an MQ-9 strike against what we thought was an imminent threat to H-Kaya. That strike was a mistake, and I take full responsibility for that strike. I was under no pressure from any quarter to conduct the strike. It was based on our intelligence read of the situation on the ground. While in many cases we were right with our intelligence and forestalled ISIS-K attacks, in this case we were wrong, tragically wrong. I appreciate that there are many other topics of interest to this committee, and I look forward to answering your questions on all of them. I'll close here by reiterating my profound gratitude and appreciation for every soldier, sailor, Marine, airman, and guardian, as well as our intelligence and Department of Defense and Department of State comrades who contributed to each of these difficult missions. I remain humbled by their sense of duty and courage. Thank you.